I'm a receptionist at a popular hotel chain in the US, and for the better part of a year, I've been working the overnight shifts. This night, I was doing my usual 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift. It was pouring outside, so I wasn't expecting any walk-ins, and the schedule showed no bookings for the night. On nights like these, my job is simple. Just stay awake, answer phone calls, and assist current guests with any room service requests or checkouts. We had a coffee machine in the lobby, so I made myself a cup and kept it by my side, trying to stay alert. Even though I'd been on overnight shifts for a while now, I still struggled with staying awake, and the rain outside made me even more tired. At around 1 a.m., a phone call came through. I answered, but before I could even say hello, a man's voice quickly asked if we were still accepting walk-ins. His voice sounded muffled, and there was a loud, constant background noise that I couldn't quite make out. "Yeah, we have rooms available for walk-ins tonight," I replied, trying to keep the conversation simple. But he responded, and I still couldn't understand what he was saying. I asked him to repeat himself, and that's when I looked up from the desk. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a small light glowing outside, coming from a phone. Someone was holding it up to their ear, standing right up against the front window in the pouring rain. I realized it had to be the man I was speaking with. I was about to wave to him, but something about the situation felt off. My gut told me to ignore it, so I did. A moment later, he hung up, and I saw the light go out. The man, barely visible through the rain, started moving toward the entrance. The doors opened with a soft chime, and he stepped inside, dragging water across the lobby floor. He approached the counter and, without hesitation, bluntly asked for a room. He was completely soaked, water dripping from his hair, yet his face wore a look of pure exhaustion. I'd never seen someone appear so sleep-deprived. "Okay," I said, still uneasy, and found him a room. "How would you like to pay?" I asked. He slowly reached into his pocket, pulled out a debit card, and handed it to me. I swiped it, but the transaction was declined. I looked up at him, expecting him to say something, but he just stared at me, his gaze unblinking. It didn't go through," I said, trying to stay calm. "Do you have another card?" He didn't respond. His stare never wavered, and he didn't even flinch. The seconds dragged on, and the silence grew heavier. I could feel the tension building in my chest, and my unease quickly turned into genuine fear. I looked down at the card on the desk, sliding it back toward him, but he didn't even look at it. Without a word, he turned around and started walking away from the desk, heading toward the hallway where the rooms were. At that moment, I knew something wasn't right. I quickly pressed the button to call the police, then rushed out into the hallway, where I found him standing at the door to one of the rooms. He was pounding on it, shouting in a voice that was both frantic and terrifying, demanding the person inside open the door. I tried to tell him to stop, but I didn't want to get too close. I had no idea what kind of state he was in or what he might do next. Then, in one swift motion, he pulled a small knife from his pocket and began trying to pry the door open. "Stop!" I yelled, my heart racing. "The police are on their way." The man paused for a moment, glancing back at me with a look so cold, so full of malice, that I froze in place. Then, without warning, he screamed at me, demanding that I open the door for him. Panic surged through me, and all I could think to do was run. I bolted for the exit, rushing outside into the parking lot. I glanced back through the window and saw him return to the same door, pounding on it again, relentless. It wasn't long before the police arrived. They rushed in and got to the man before he could break the door down. Somehow, they managed to disarm him, getting the knife away from him and locking him in their car. The person who had been staying in the room came out. She was a young woman, visibly shaken and horrified by what had just happened. After she calmed down, she explained that the man was her ex, someone she hadn't seen or spoken to in over 10 years. How he knew where she was staying, or even what room she was in, was a mystery. The police had no answers, and the unsettling truth was that no one knew how long he had been stalking her. But what really chilled me to the core was the realization of what might have happened had he actually gotten inside. He had been relentless, desperate, and violent in a way that suggested he was willing to do anything to get to her. The whole situation left me shaken, and I couldn't stop thinking about how close I had been to witnessing something far worse. I didn't know what the man's intentions had been, but the thought that he might have done something far more dangerous had he gotten in made my skin crawl. I couldn't help but wonder, what was he capable of, and how far was he willing to go? I was pretty young when this happened, 16 or 17. It was my first job, just some trashy pizza place. They paid slightly more than other places, and I made extra from tips when I did deliveries, so I stuck around for a while. I don't remember too much about the beginning of my shift that night. I probably started at my regular time, around 6 p.m., and was scheduled to work until midnight. But the first half of my shift passed by like any other day. It wasn't until sometime around 10 p.m. that we got an order for delivery. I packed it up and headed out. The place was 15 minutes away, tucked in a small neighborhood. Took me a little while to find the house, though. All the trees were blocking the address numbers, and a lot of the homes had long driveways leading far back from the road. I ended up circling around a few times before I finally found it. When I drove down the driveway and parked closer to the house, I saw that it was one of those large, old homes, the kind that looked like they had been there forever. I grabbed the food and walked up to the front porch. The whole neighborhood felt unusually quiet. It was like I was miles away from everything, surrounded by nothing but trees. When I reached the porch, though, I couldn't help but notice that the front door was wide open. Now, I'd seen plenty of people leave their doors cracked open before, but this door was fully open, which felt a bit excessive. Still, I shrugged it off, figuring they were probably just busy or didn't want to deal with the door. I walked over and knelt down to set the food inside when I heard a voice call out, "Hey, would you mind bringing the pizza in here? I'm just setting up the table." It was a man's voice, and it sounded friendly enough. I knew it was generally frowned upon to enter someone's home while delivering, but honestly, it wasn't that unusual of a request. It usually only took a few extra seconds and could land you a good tip, so I decided to step inside. I walked down the hallway into the kitchen, set the box on the table, but there was no one else around. I had just heard his voice only moments ago, and yet, I didn't hear him move anywhere. It was strange. The house was eerily quiet, too, like there was no sound at all, not even the usual hum of appliances or distant noises from outside. A shiver ran through me, and as I stood there, unsure of what to do, his voice called out again. "Can you bring it in here, please?" This time, the voice came from down another hallway, one that connected to the kitchen. There was a single door that was wide open, but the room behind it was pitch black, no light on at all. The voice sounded like it came from just behind the doorway, as though he was standing right out of sight. I froze for a second, my heart starting to race. I didn't know what to do, but everything about the situation felt off. It wasn't just the strange request or the silence. It was the fact that I hadn't heard him move, not a single step, and I hadn't seen anyone else around. After a few seconds, I decided I'd had enough. My instincts kicked in, and I turned around quickly, walking fast back toward the front door. I stepped outside, back onto the porch, and without looking back, I got into my car and drove straight back to work. I never said a word about it to anyone. I figured I'd either get made fun of for being scared or for being stupid, so I just kept it to myself. But thinking back on it now, there was definitely something off about that guy. Nothing about that encounter was normal. I'm just glad I was smart enough to leave when I did, because there's really no telling what would have happened if I'd gone into that room with him. Over the last 5 years, I've been working odd jobs all around the country. I live in a van, so I move around a lot, but a few months out of the year, I have to stay in one area for an extended amount of time to rack up some cash before moving on. At this time, I was staying in the mid-east portion of Utah and had taken up a job at a gas station. It was located on a road that was really only used by locals to go in and out of state without having to deal with highway traffic. There was nothing else on this route, just a road with a lone gas station for the occasional driver to fill up. That's kind of why it was perfect for me, though. The location didn't matter since I lived in a van. I could easily stay there for an extended amount of time and work. Anyway, I'd been there for a bit over a month, and up to this point, I was still working random shifts. This day, I was working from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. It wasn't a special night by any means. No customers, aside from a few stopping by the pumps, and not much to do as far as stocking or anything. I mostly stood around on my phone or paced the store, making the shelves look nice. Then, at 1 a.m., a car pulled into the station and parked in one of the few spaces right in front of the door. Knowing they must be coming inside, I went back to the counter. A man got out and walked in, looking over and smiling at me before giving me a nod as he turned down one of the aisles. He started whistling as he looked at a couple of things, picking them up, putting them back, then continuing down the aisle and repeating the process. I wasn't sure if he was just taking a break from driving or if he actually needed something, but the items he was picking up and looking at were all different. He didn't seem interested in buying anything. Then, without warning, he abruptly stopped whistling, walked over to the door, and left. I didn't think he stole anything, but it was strange. He got into his car and started moving around, reaching into his back seat. After a few moments, he got back out of the car and came into the shop again. That's when I started to feel uneasy. This was exactly how I imagined an armed robbery might begin. But the aggression I expected didn't happen. Instead, he walked over to the counter and casually asked how my night was, starting a quick back and forth of small talk. I acted as normally as I could, just in case I was overthinking things. But then he asked if I could help him with his car. He said his tires needed air and that he didn't see any pumps outside. The station didn't have any air pumps for self-use, but we did carry a handheld air compressor for emergency situations. I got it out and followed him to his car. He pointed to the tire that needed air, and I ducked down, putting the compressor line in. I had it in for less than 10 seconds before the gauge showed the pressure was at the right level. I pulled the line out and stood up, starting to walk back to the shop. But just as I reached the door, he rushed in front of me, blocking my way. His right hand was deep inside his jacket pocket as he stared at me with a cold, emotionless face. I told him to move, but of course he didn't. He stayed there, his eyes locked on mine, and I could see that he was preparing to do something. My heart was pounding in my chest as I took a step back, trying to say anything I could to calm the situation. The tension was unbearable, my instincts screaming at me that something was about to go horribly wrong. Just as I thought he was going to snap, he suddenly ran around me, jumped into his car, and sped off aggressively. I took the chance to go inside and immediately called 911. To my surprise, the police arrived only minutes later. They were already on the chase, looking for the exact car the man was driving. The officer stated that the man was on the run from a recently committed crime near the border. They didn't give me any details, but the way they said it made me think it wasn't just some small robbery. After I gave a quick statement, they headed back out on the road, searching for him. After that, I never got an update. I tried looking up recent crimes and anything else that could be helpful, but found nothing useful. I don't know what that man was planning to do or why he stopped at the station. My best guess is that he was planning to steal my van and conceal his tracks, or at least delay them. However, considering the crime he had just committed, I think my life could have easily been at risk. Why he chose not to do anything to me remains a mystery.